The .NET Foundation is currently in crisis. So I thought it'd be a great time to talk about this and really get to the details of it rather than just the emotion around it. So let's talk first about what the .NET Foundation is, what happened, what the fallout is, and then my thoughts both on a specific situation as well as generally around the foundation and where I think it should probably go. Now, if you're watching this, my name is Tim Corey, and I usually try to help you learn programming or things around programming. But sometimes we get to talk about the news in programming, especially around .NET and C#, because that's where I normally cover. So let's get into this .NET Foundation. I think it's a lot more murky in some ways than some people think. It's a lot less cut and dried in a lot of ways. So let's get right into it. Now, the .NET Foundation was founded in 2014 by Microsoft. It was designed to be, as they said right here on the website, an independent, nonprofit organization that's been established to support an innovative, commercially friendly, open source ecosystem around the .NET platform. Essentially, they're looking to help open source projects grow and improve and help people find those open source projects, help them work well with businesses and so on. So essentially just a boost or an aid to open source development. That's kind of the real focus of the .NET Foundation and the ecosystem. Now, there are some other things they talk about in here about their desires. If you go to the About page here, there is more information about them. The FAQs will tell you more and so on. So they do have corporate sponsorships as well as personal sponsorships or personal memberships as well. So let's talk briefly as well about the personal memberships because there is a little bit of confusion here. I want to point out the differences. So as a individual, you can join as a member of the .NET Foundation. And if we look here, let me zoom in a little bit. This provides two different things. First of all, an opportunity to influence. You can partake in ongoing discussions, you can vote on the board of directors, you can directly help with one of the many action groups and more. You can also stay up to date and hear the news of what's happening first, even if you take a more passive membership role. Okay, so they're saying, hey, we're going to allow you as a community member to join the .NET Foundation and be able to influence open source and how we help open source in the community. Now, just to be clear and upfront with this, I am not a member of the .NET Foundation. So I have not joined the .NET Foundation in any capacity, not even just as a member. So there is a discussion on how to join membership, and then from there you can go on to join leadership or groups and so on. So we're going to talk in this video a lot about the .NET Foundation and how the leadership has interacted with especially open source projects. Now, I do want to point out that there are other things that the .NET Foundation does besides just help open source projects. For example, they help with .NET meetups, getting speakers, getting involved resources. They provide resources to user groups and so on. They also provide some education as well, including the .NET Foundation Academy, which is just starting. So that's the .NET Foundation in a really brief nutshell. It was started in 2014. The one thing I want to point out is it was started by Microsoft. Now, remember back over here, if we look at this, it says it's an independent organization. Now, there is a little bit of an asterisk that should go there. And the reason why is because in the bylaws of the .NET Foundation, there was a provision that said that the founding member, who is Microsoft, has the right to appoint the executive director. And the executive director has an awful lot of power over how the .NET Foundation runs. And Microsoft appoints a Microsoft employee to be the executive director. So this is a bit of an asterisk here because independence is not quite as independent as totally separate. It's not totally separate from Microsoft, and yet at the same time, this is an organization that is made up primarily of non-Microsoft people. So the board of directors isn't necessarily Microsoft people. They get voted on by the community. So if you look at the board of directors, you will see Microsoft employee Bill Wagner, but then you'll see Frank, Javier, and Matthias, and Rob and Sean are all non-Microsoft employees, with Rich being another Microsoft employee. There is also the executive director, which we'll get to later. It's why she's not on this list, but Claire is here, and Claire is also a Microsoft employee. So there is a balance here of Microsoft and non-Microsoft employees, and yet the executive director, the one who has the control to override votes and who has control to do a lot of things in the foundation, is a Microsoft employee. And that'll become important throughout this discussion. So again, that's a nutshell of .NET Foundation. Let's talk about what happened recently. Now, there are 3 different events that happened pretty close together that we need to talk about. The first one is Rodney Little left the .NET Foundation. In fact, if we see this announcement right here, we'll see that from the .NET Foundation, Rodney Little has decided to resign from the foundation. He has been a board member and chair of the technical steering group for the past year. We wish him all the best as he refocuses on his personal life. That phrase is getting important pretty soon, because this statement right here was not brought about by Rodney's statements. In fact, Rodney had no clue that they were going to say that he was refocusing on his personal life. That's not what was happening. As Rodney says, he was looking to go out without really any fanfare. He was trying to go out in total silence. That was his goal. And no, he was not refocusing on his career. And so since the .NET Foundation kind of made the first statement where they said, hey, here's what's happening. And Rodney had a bunch of friends that were reaching out about making sure he was okay, had concern over what was going on and so on. He had to say something. He had to say, yes, I'm fine. No, it's not a personal problem going on. And so with that, he basically kept going. He started talking about why he did leave, since it was not for personal reasons. And a lot of people are asking for this from him. And so I'm not going to read all of this. I will leave links down in the description for you to read all of these things. I'll leave them in order that we go through them. That way you can go through and kind of follow along in this. But in it, partying is bitter and not sweet. So he talked about why he was leaving, what was good, what was bad. And instead of being transparent about bylaws, they weren't being transparent. There's some things going on in the foundation that he didn't see as promoting the community. So the question he asked down here, are you here to enforce Microsoft's will on the open source, or are you here to help foster and promote a healthy community? And that's important because that's the question that a lot of people are asking. But Rodney, as a former board member, asking that same question is concerning. So that was the first shoe to drop, was the fact that Rodney actually had more to say than just it was for personal reasons that he was leaving. And so he kind of opened that up with, hey, there's some problems here that need to be addressed. Next up was a pull request. I'm going to get to the actual pull request later. I want to talk about it, but a pull request by Claire, who was the executive director for the foundation, that was frustrating. It violated the rules of the repository. So an executive director of the .NET Foundation, using .NET Foundation power seemingly, made some changes to a open source project at the express without the express permission of the repository owner. In fact, going against what the repository owner's wishes were. So that was shoe number 2 to drop. And because this is a 3-footed beast, we have shoe number 3, which is the .NET Foundation moving projects. So this is kind of a big deal. So when a project joins the .NET Foundation, they allow the .NET Foundation some control over the project. For instance, if the maintainers were to pass away, let's say there's one maintainer and that person passes away, the .NET Foundation can assign a new maintainer or new owner to that project so that it continues on even after untimely death. That's important because companies are more likely to want to invest in or want to use projects that they know are going to be around for a long time. Relying on one person not to die is not a great strategy for a company that may be risking thousands or millions of dollars on this software. So with that, there comes some control. However, what was discussed and discovered was that the .NET Foundation had basically abused their, at least in people's minds, had abused their rights as kind of like temporary owners or partial owners of the project to move the projects from the public GitHub repositories to underneath the .NET Foundation's enterprise control. So if you see here, there's 3 different posts here. One was from Glenn, where he found that, first of all, he kind of goes through, hey, the .NET Foundation hasn't been helping us. In fact, they were unable to release for 3 months because they're being held up by the .NET Foundation. So, and then later, that's when he discovered that reactive UI had been moved over. In fact, the licensing was locked to the .NET Foundation. And so he goes into what that means. So basically, there is some control of the project, in fact, quite a bit of control that's held only by the .NET Foundation, not even by the project maintainer, not by the person or group that created the project or works on the project currently. So there was some concern there. And then it goes on for not that one, but this one right here, where again, Jeremy chimes in and says, hey, that's kind of the same problem with fluent validation, where the repository was transferred over to the GitHub Enterprise account for underneath the .NET Foundation instead of where it originally was located. So there was an ownership change and a move that was not communicated to the owners. So that is a third thing kind of in a row that caused problems. So first we have Rodney leaving from the foundation and saying, hey, there's some problems here. Then we had then we had Claire doing some things potentially as the director that were basically heavy-handed and against the wishes of a repository. And then third, we had the .NET Foundation essentially moving projects into their own control from where they resided publicly. Now they're still public, they're still available, and from the outside perspective, there's not much that's changed, but from a control perspective, a lot has changed. So those are the 3 things that happened recently that caused a stir, caused some problems. So let's talk about what the fallout from these 3 things has been before getting into what my thoughts are on this situation. So first off, we have Claire's apology, which, by the way, this apology was not really just from Claire. It has been said by other people that, hey, Claire was working with somebody else to craft this, and this would be kind of the first response from the board in general, but this came from Claire as the executive director. So Claire says that, and I'll zoom in here so you can see it. Again, the links are down below. I made a mistake last week when I made a pull request and merged it into the project without discussion. We're going to come back to that. Now, I've been involved in this project as a founder maintainer for many years, but I was not active recently and I overstepped. I failed to consider how the interaction would look through the lens of my current role. We may wear many hats, and that subtle distinction does not change the fact that this was a mistake. I apologize. I sincerely apologize. So then she goes into, I want to note that the foundation exists to provide services and support to project maintainers and encourage and enable the use of open source software by .NET developers. In the last week, there have been multiple cases where project maintainers were surprised and unhappy about the governance of the .NET Foundation projects. In this post, I'll describe what happened and why. So this apology is both an apology and also a here's why we do what we do. So she starts in first back on the reactive UI project, which is the project that she made the pull request on, and kind of gets back into making a pull request without explicit sign-off from other maintainers. Okay, but then coming down here, it's clear the .NET Foundation product governance model is not well understood. Project maintainers sign an agreement that either assigns or contributes their project to the .NET Foundation. So what she's saying there is, hey, when you sign your project up to the foundation, you are either assigning your project to the .NET Foundation or contributing your project to the .NET Foundation. So basically, you've already given it away, and us making changes to it is just part of the deal because we own it now. So this is where kind of the second half of this apology goes into the explanation of what the .NET Foundation does and why it was just basically a mix-up. Okay, so we'll post another document that this week as well. This is a pattern that needs to be resolved. Projects might not fully understand what joining the .NET Foundation means. Okay, so it's she is saying it's a confusion issue. We're just not on the same page. So, and she does say that's obviously not sufficient. We'll post new documents to describe what you can expect when joining the foundation. That will include changes, observable and legal, and new benefits. Okay, so that's what the statement's about, and kind of talking through again the apology and the hey, there was some confusion on who owns your project now and what cannot be done to it. Okay, so that was the apology 5 days ago at this point. Now, underneath that, 21 comments, 74 replies. There's quite a bit of feedback here. I'm definitely not going to go through all of it, but I do want to point out that there was a lot of feelings about this. There's a lot of positive and negative about this this post. As you can see from the thumbs up and thumbs down, there's 153 thumbs up, 177 thumbs down as of the recording of this video. There's a lot of stuff going on here. There's a lot of people that are kind of concerned. There's a lot of people who are having some problems with the statement, and others that are in support of it. So that's the next step in this process. We had 3 problems. This was the first step after those 3 problems, which is the apology. And then the next step, the next day, or 2 days ago, 2 days later, was that Claire had resigned. So there was quite a few calls in the discussion under number 39, the I'm sorry post. There were quite a few calls for her resignation as the executive director. And the response was that it has become clear the community has lost trust in my leadership, and I therefore tender my resignation. So Claire has resigned as the executive director. Remember, the executive director is appointed by Microsoft, and the executive director has pretty large amounts of power when it comes to directing and shaping how the .NET Foundation operates. Now, right now, Claire is still on the board as an ex officio advisory position, which what that exactly looks like, we're not sure, because in some cases, an ex officio member can vote just like any other member, and others it's more of a just there to kind of pass the baton. So not really clear there. That's okay. We don't have to have all the details right now, but there should be some kind of passing the baton at least. So that's good. So that was kind of the next step. Okay. And from that was even more frustration, comments, 15 comments, 53 replies that ranged across the board. This was just schoolyard bullying, and, Claire should not have had to resign, to, hey, it was disappointing, to, no, this was the right thing to do, and there needs to be more involved. And maybe it wasn't Claire that should have resigned, or just Claire. Maybe it should have been the whole board. So there's a lot of stuff going on here, and there's a lot of frustration, there's a lot of anger, there's a lot of mistrust. So now I think it's time for me to talk about, hey, what's the my thoughts on this situation. And for that, I kind of want to go back over the one that seems to be the oddball out, and that is the pull request. So back here on 39, where Claire apologizes, made a PR and merged it into the project without discussion. And I've been a founder and maintainer for many years. Not active recently, I overstepped. I failed to consider. Okay, so this wording right here, I want to look back at, hey, what was that pull request, and was it that bad? So let's talk about the pull request itself. Now, if you're not familiar, what a pull request is you do some work on a project, and you, instead of just committing your code to the main branch, you create what's called a pull request where others can review it, and then a project owner can merge those changes into the main project if it's approved. The purpose for this is to have some checks and balances and to not break the project. Because if the changes aren't good changes, then it could take down people who are using this project or using the latest version of this project and cause major issues with a production level product. Now, this is reactive UI and specifically Splat. So this is pull request number 778. Now, normally, you do not make a pull request and also commit it yourself. Meaning you don't make a pull request and then say, yeah, go ahead and merge those changes in. There are times when you do as a maintainer, but usually you don't. So we have Claire 12 days ago say, hey, I add support for reproducible builds as required by the .NET Foundation project requirements. Now, just to be clear, this is edited. So the original post said, add support for reproducible builds. That's all it said. So then Glenn, who is a major contributor to the Splat project, says, please open an issue discussing what this is and follow the pull request template. All right. So Glenn also closed this 12 days ago. So it was opened, he closed it and said, hey, follow the rules of the project. Claire reopened it and made a comment, added the build label. Glenn closed it again and said, "You haven't discussed this with any maintainers." Claire reopened it, then Claire merged the commit. Okay, so at this point, Claire has opened it. Glenn says, "You need to follow the right template," and closed it. Claire opened it back up. Glenn closed it again and said, "You haven't discussed this with the maintainers." Claire reopened it again and merged it into the main branch. Then after all of that, Claire said, "I'm a maintainer of reactive UI and have been for years, thanks." Essentially saying, hey, when you say I haven't discussed the maintainers, I am the maintainers, but thanks anyways. Thanks for playing. That's arrogant. Okay, that was not a good call. But I also want to point out, this is not, if we go back here, without discussion. No, there was discussion. You were told, no, don't do this, repeatedly, and you continued to do it anyway. Okay? So I failed to consider how I look. This isn't about look. This is about the fact that you bullied your way through a current maintainer and did it anyway. And did so with an attitude. Now, Glenn pointed out why this was a problem and said you haven't been involved for over 3 years in this project, to which Claire responded, hey, this is from the foundation. So again, this was edited. This first post was edited to say, hey, not just add support for reproducible builds, but as required by .NET Foundation project requirements under the code subsection. Essentially, hey, the foundation said you have to have this. I'm just doing what the foundation says as the executive director. Okay, that's where this kind of comes across not as a wearing a different hat, but as a no, this was the executive director hat that she was wearing as she did this, because she started dropping the foundation itself. Okay, then she said there's no risk. It's not a third party, it's a first party. I never stopped being a maintainer. I just stepped away for other things. This was a small build time enhancement that improves the security of the package. There's not much discussion required for this. At this point, she is still saying, hey, I did it because, and she's justifying, okay? And then Dan comes back and talks through, hey, here's the reason why this is a problem. You're not an active maintainer and so on. And they have reverted it since, okay? And yes, one person points out, this sounds like a code of conduct violation on how you go about working with open source project. This was bullying and pushing your way through rather than just following the procedures that we do for any pull request, okay? And that was the end of the discussion. So this process right here, this does not look like a without discussion. There was discussion, just not the correct discussion. There was the discussion of, I'm going to do it anyway. Okay. And this was not just a slight overstep and was not just wearing a different hat. Okay. Now let's talk about the claim that, that she was what'd she say here? She was a, maintainer of reactive UX and a contributor. So if we go here and look at the contributors for Splat specifically, now reactive UI in general may be different, but for Splat specifically, over the past 8 years, Glenn Watson is number 1 for contributions. Now, who was she talking to? Glenn Watson. Number 2, number 3, number 4, where is Claire? Right down here. Number 24, these are the contributions by Claire, 1 commit. The only commit that she has is that commit that she bullied her way through to pushing to the main branch. So that does not look like an active maintainer. That does not look like a maintainer of this project at all. That looks like a person who has rights to this, but has never done any work for it. So the charge over here that she was a maintainer, a long-standing maintainer, early project contributor, found that's not even that same project. I mean, it's part of the same ecosystem, but it's not just that she wasn't active recently. She was not a maintainer for many years of that specific repository. This is really stretching to say that any of these apply to what she did. So that's the pull request. Does not look great. Okay, that's my thought. But then also, let's talk about the .NET Foundation. When they said, hey, we have control over your projects, which has been disputed by a lot of project owners. If we look here under the new project onboarding, there is right down here a couple of different models. The assignment model, which project ownership and other IP is assigned to the .NET Foundation. Okay, so that's one model. You assign ownership and other IP to the .NET Foundation. But there's a different model, and that's the contribution model. The project retains ownership of a copyright, but grants the .NET Foundation a broad license to the project's code and other IP. So contribution, you retain ownership of the copyright. And there's some interesting wording there or thoughts there behind what is the copyright versus ownership of the project itself. Well, if we look up here at the history for this document and look at the July 26th change. So that's July 26th, 2021. That's only a few months ago. We will see that, the change of wording from a project retains ownership of the project to a project retains ownership of the copyright. I think because they said project here and here, a project retains ownership of itself sounds a little weird. So I think they changed it to copyright. But either way, whether this is a change in philosophy or just a change in wording to better reflect what it is, either way, we have the idea of two different models, assignment model and contribution model. So if we already have assignment model where the project ownership and other IP is assigned to the .NET Foundation, it would seem as though the other model would not be the same exact thing. And in fact, it says the project retains ownership of the copyright. So this is where the confusion is coming in, because in the statement over here on Claire's apology, she said that the governance model is not well understood. Project maintainers sign an agreement that either assigns or contributes their project to the .NET Foundation. Read those words. Assign the project to the foundation, that'd be the assignment model, or contributes their project to the foundation. That seems like just whether it is given or given. That's not what the document says. So there is a confusion. It's not well understood, but it seems like the not well understood is by the .NET Foundation, not by the owners of the projects. But based upon this lack of confusion, or this abundance of confusion, this is where that, hey, we took it, can either be a mistake by the .NET Foundation, or it can be more purposeful, but either way, it does not seem to be correct. based upon these documents and based upon what the feelings or what the desires were of the organizations that did use this contribution model to assign their project or put their project underneath the .NET Foundation. So let's talk about my conclusions to all this, my thoughts on all of this. First of all, I think that Claire made more than a mistake. There was a intentional, willful act that was pretty far down the road to disregarding a project main contributor, disregarding their opinions, disregarding the policy of the open source project, disregarding the wishes of the open source project to get her own way. So I think it goes way beyond just making a mistake. I also think that the .NET Foundation overstepped in how they took control of those projects. And I don't think the apology really dealt with either correctly. I think the apology for the pull request was more of a, I wear a lot of hats and I made an oopsie. That really wasn't what happened. If you look back through the history, you see that it was much more deliberate than that. And it was much more intentional in the reopening multiple times of the issue, in the saying, yeah, I actually am a main contributor and I am one of the people that can do this, even though that wasn't the request. It was for all of them to have a say. So that wasn't good on the pull request side. Then on the foundation side, there wasn't an apology. There was just a, hey, you need to read the bylaws better, read that contract you signed better, because we really do have control. We'll do better at communicating that. I don't think that was well handled either or apologized for. So those are the specific thoughts. But then in general, Microsoft is rebuilding their reputation as a company. For a long time, Microsoft was really focused on extinguishing the competition, really doing anything they could to eliminate other competitors, because they thought that that was the way to run a good business. And only more recently, with the changes that have come about with .NET Core and the things that really have come from the top down with Satya on down, to say, hey, no, we want to change this. We want to embrace Linux, not just say it's a horrible operating system, actually embrace it and bring it into what we do and integrate with it. And we want to embrace open source. And you want to say that it's not a bad thing, it's a good thing. And we want to embrace the idea that you don't have to run our code on our servers or on Windows. And we can do it on Mac or on Linux or on iOS and Android. This idea that we can be much better than we are by being more open. And that's a direct 180 conversion for Microsoft. And it has been going, for the most part, pretty well. Yes, there are some people that are still detractors. Yes, there are people that are still holding on to the old Microsoft. And that's going to happen because a reputation takes a lifetime to build. And yeah, I think that this right here isn't a good look. And the problem is that a reputation can take a lifetime to build, but it only takes a few minutes to destroy. And yes, I know that the .NET Foundation isn't Microsoft. But yet when Microsoft pretty much controls it, it's kind of Microsoft. And we're going to see it that way. So I think that the .NET Foundation is too tightly controlled by Microsoft. I think that's a problem. I think that it both ties the organization of Microsoft to the organization of the .NET Foundation. And so when Microsoft does something, it reflects on the foundation. When the foundation does something, it reflects on Microsoft. And with that also comes a lot of question marks. Questions about, well, is this really what's happening, or is Microsoft pulling the strings? Was this a mistake, or was this Microsoft exerting control again? Was this just a misunderstanding over who owned the license to the projects, or was this Microsoft looking to extinguish, or the first step in extinguishing these open source competitors for them? So I think that connection is just too strong. I think there needs to be some changes there. The board needs to be transparent. This is a open source loving, open source supporting foundation that's a nonprofit. The board minutes should be open source. They should be available. They should be right there for you to find and read through and understand what's going on. And they're not. Okay, there's a lot of other committees that have minutes that are available, but not the board itself. And as they say, the board controls the foundation. So those minutes absolutely need to be available to the public to read. There should not be something hidden about a nonprofit organization that's helping open source projects. Okay, there shouldn't be something hidden there. If you have to protect somebody, that's one thing. And you could say, hey, name redacted, or certain section here was off the record or outside the minutes because of the fact to protect an identity, or to protect a conversation that was more personal in nature. But by and large, those minutes need to be available. And then I think that the .NET Foundation needs to have very clear what the value is that they provide. Right now, the value is nebulous. The value is we'll provide legal services, we'll provide help, we'll provide, none of these things are concrete. None of these things are really very clear and obvious. There should be a bullet point list before you sign up that says, here are the things that we will do for you, or at minimum, we will do for you. And yes, the board can do more. Yes, the foundation can do more. Yes, they could say, hey, you got a new thing to help you even further. But at minimum, these are the things specifically that we will do. Right now, I just don't see that. Now, also, accountability needs to happen. Now, we talked about, Claire and the pull request, and also the moving of those projects. There was debate on both sides. There was debate on whether Claire should resign or whether it was bullying to say that she should. I understand both sides. I understand there was a lot of fear, anger, frustration that happened because of what happened to people's projects. There's a lot of concern, a lot of angst around basically seeing your hard work taken away from you. And that can really heighten emotions. And then the other side, there were people that I think that were seeing this as, hey, it was a mistake. And mistakes need to be learned from, not just be caused to destroy a person. So yes, there's both sides here, but I think that accountability needs to happen. And because of, yes, partly because of that pull request, which was not a good look, it definitely wasn't, and it was really done seemingly under the hat of the executive director of the foundation, because of the fact that was one of the reasons that was used for why this had to be put in place, why it had to be kind of forced through, was because that's the foundation said needed to happen. So that's part of it. But I think also the fact that these projects were essentially hijacked, were put underneath the GitHub repository for the foundation and taken out of their own repository without the project maintainer's approval. Because they were hijacked and because that was handled so poorly, I think that rests on someone's shoulders. Someone was in the wrong here. And the executive director, based upon those bylaws, and yes, I read through all of them, based upon those bylaws, the executive director has pretty broad spanning control over the board and over the foundation. The executive director can negate a downvote. They can negate an upvote. They can basically have control over a lot of what goes on in the foundation. And so when it comes to who's in charge, that's the executive director. And so two different missteps, and then the handling of how Rodney left the board, I think that all three of those things land eventually at the feet of the executive director. So I do think that accountability includes the resignation of Claire. And I think that, yes, that's hard because Claire has done a lot of good things for the .NET Foundation and for the community in general. Claire has done a lot to contribute to open source and advancing .NET open source in the community. But there is still accountability for actions. And so it's not an attack. It's not a coming from a place of anger and fear and frustration as much as it is you are accountable for your actions, and your actions don't line up with what is supposed to happen, then you have to step down. And so I think that was the right move, even though it is a somewhat painful move. So is that enough? I'm not sure if it is. I do think that there are some other board members that should probably think through their role in this as well. Now, there are new board members, and so they had no role in this, and so therefore they obviously can't be blamed for any of this. But I think that the board members that were involved in these decisions that may have contributed to these actions might need to look at if they're taking accountability for their actions as well. And what that looks like, I'm not sure. I am not recommending anything. I'm just saying that should be thought through. Okay? I do want to point out that in these situations, things that do not help, anger, sniping, personal attacks, they don't help. They actively hurt the situation. I kept an eye on the discussion throughout, underneath the apology and underneath the resignation as well. I was keeping an eye on, who's saying what and how's it going. And what I saw was a bit of a spiral, because there were some great points made. There were some well-reasoned arguments as to what should happen, what the problem was, and why this was an issue. But then it kind of devolved at one point, or a couple of points, into personal attacks, and then personal attacks to the person that's personally attacking. And what it did was it took away from the reasoned discussion. It took away from the actual issues, and it put the spotlight more and more on the people fighting and took it away from the actual issues. And so it made it much more cloudy, and really in the end, it hurt the situation. So I encourage you, as you're interacting, take a step back, remove the anger, remove the frustration, definitely remove the personal attacks. Talk through this, think through this in a way that is going to, in the end, help them move forward. Okay? So be careful of that. And down in the comments down below, I absolutely want you to sound off on what your thoughts are on this situation, but do so in a constructive manner. Don't attack people. Don't just be angry, because if you do, I'll talk to you if it's minor, and if it's major, I'm just going to delete your comment, because I'm not going to be a part of that in this community. I want to see progress. I want to see positive moving forward, and I want this situation to be resolved in a good way, and that's just going to just detract from a possible resolution. So my conclusion of the situation, right now, I'm not sure what the value of the .NET Foundation is currently. And in fact, I'm not a part of the .NET Foundation because I've never found the reason to be. It's been a rah join the foundation, but I've never seen the value of it. I've never seen the concrete, and this is why I should join, either as a person or as a project. Now, I don't have a project to contribute, but even if I did, I don't see the value right now. Now, I am interested in seeing what changes come out of this whole situation, because I think that's very important. If major changes don't happen, I think the .NET Foundation is not a viable organization. I really don't think that there's a value in adding to it. I think there's actually a danger to the community and a danger to Microsoft and a danger to .NET if it continues. So if major changes don't happen, I am not a fan of the .NET Foundation, and I don't think it should be a part of our community. Now, if major changes do happen, and by major changes I mean open transparency by the board, I mean the idea that there's clear stated values, not nebulous values, not things like we provide legal support, we help with, those are nebulous statements. Clear, exact statements, exactly what benefits you're going to add to a project in clear terms. You can have legalese, that's fine, but then have a clear statement that says exactly what you're going to do for the project, and then what you are going to take as well. Be very, very clear in clear language. You can say, we will take ownership of the project if that's what you're going to do. But if you hide behind wording that's legalese, where two different types of plans mean the same thing, that's unethical. That's not okay in my book. That needs a change. So a major change would be to say, this is exactly what we're going to do, and this is exactly what we're not going to do. This is where you will stand after joining, and here's the benefits you will get. I think those things need to happen. The board needs to be transparent on what they're doing. And I think that really the .NET Foundation needs to improve what it does as far as benefits. Because right now it seems like those benefits aren't really there. And it has been 7 years. So the excuse that I hear a lot is they're still working it out. It's been 7 years. It's time that they figure it out. It's going to be too late in year 8 or year 9 or year 10. It has to be figured out now, and it has to be a value to the community. So that's where I land. I think that the .NET Foundation is at a tipping point. And I think that what happens from here will determine if it should proceed or if it should not proceed as an organization. Now, it'll continue either way, but whether or not we contribute to it, whether or not we join it, whether or not projects stay in it, will depend a lot on how they proceed. And really, Microsoft's reputation is on the line here, and so is the foundation. So I really am rooting for them to get it right. I want .NET to succeed. I want C# to succeed. I want the open source community around .NET to succeed. And I want the .NET Foundation to succeed. But to do so, it can't just be it succeeds because we want it to. It has to be that it succeeds because it's of value. Okay? So those are my thoughts. Leave yours down in the comment. Again, I really hope that you can be respectful of each other and respectful of everyone involved here. These people that are involved in .NET Foundation, these are real people. These are people who have worked to help the community. And by and large, I do not think that this is a conspiracy. I don't think this is Microsoft trying to gain more control for the most part. I'm a little concerned about a couple things, but I think that the people involved in the foundation are have their heart in the right spot. So I think that this is not about, being evil as much as it is just not doing the right thing. So I hope that we can, as a community, encourage them, push in the right direction, and do so in a positive and uplifting way. So leave those comments down below. Let me know your thoughts. I'll try and interact with you on what's going on as well. All right. Thanks for listening. Thanks for watching. And as always, I am Tim Corey.